Firefighters of Reddit, what's the dumbest way you've seen someone accidentally start a house fire? The old turkey fryer on the wood deck is always a favorite. My dad is a firefighter and he once told me that if I ever want to start a fire and make it look like an accident, that the turkey cooker is a way to do it. He taught me how to commit arson and insurance fraud. In the city of Colorado Springs, the local news did a fluff piece about candle safety near Christmas. After they were done filming, the store owner that they were filming took the crew out to breakfast. She didn't put out the candles and burnt several shops to the ground. The film crew was there to film her breakdown when they realized what caused the fire. I worked for a restoration company. A family cut a small tree down and tried to stuff it up their fireplace to burn. The flute was so crowned with leaves that smoke started to fill the living room. They tried to pull the tree out and that's when it really caught fire. They tried to pull it out of the house. They got as far as the front door. All of them had second and third degree burns on their hands and arms, and the fire destroyed the front room and the entryway of their house. The insurance company asked us if we thought it was a case of fraud, and we told them, no, these people are just really stupid. A teenager was charcoal grilling in the attached garage during winter. When he was done, he decided the best place to dispose of the hot coals was into a cardboard box in the front corner of the garage, closest to the house. Yeah, it went about as well as you can imagine. My friend and her two brothers managed to start a fire with a propane grill when their parents weren't home. The gas ran out, and when their brother switched out the tank, which he had never done before, he didn't connect it properly. Cue the flames that ripped up the side of their house. Thankfully, they had the good sense to get out of there ASAP and call 911 from a neighbor's house. Firefighters were there in minutes and doused the flames quickly. One of the firefighters comes out with a very charred barbecue utensil and something hanging from it. He goes up to the kids and says, "I saved your steak." Not sure if he was serious or not. Amazingly, it didn't really do too much damage to the house. It really just burnt the siding and charred the eave. The grill, however, was a total loss. My dad was a firefighter, and once he went to a house fire that was started by the old lady who lived there. She liked to burn candles but didn't like the wax buildup that would form in the cavity, so she would soak up the liquid wax with a napkin. She was doing this when she accidentally brushed the wax-soaked napkin against the flame. She panicked and threw the napkin into the trash, where all the other wax napkins were, and the trash can exploded into flames. She fled the house, but not before she went to her oxygen tanks and flooded the house with pure oxygen, because she thought that it would smother the fire. The exact worst thing to possibly do. I'm guessing they were not able to save the house after that move. The only part of the house that was significantly damaged was the basement. All the oxygen tanks were in the basement with the fire, but she had shut the basement door on her way out, so she simultaneously helped and choked out the fire. I'm sure there was some smoke damage, but I don't think the house was completely burnt down. A Roomba knocked a scented candle over and set fire to the rest of the room. The guy said he knew the Roomba did it because he watched the whole thing happen, but didn't do anything because he thought it was funny. A fairly common one, but the response was interesting. Early February, Western PA. Guy's pipes freeze on the coldest day of the year, -8 degrees Fahrenheit. He tries to thaw them out with a propane torch, sets the wall on fire, tries to put the fire out, fails, finally calls 911. Fire chief was a block away and was on scene in under a minute. The first engine arrives in under 5 minutes. Doors are blocked by fire, exterior attack only. I'm on the attack line, spraying water into the second floor window. After 40 minutes, another firefighter comes to relieve me, but since I've been getting back spray, I'm frozen to the ground. He has to pull me loose. 2 hours later, we have it knocked down. The insurance adjuster shows up. Assistant chief explains what started the fire. Adjuster replies, "Oh yeah, we know. It's okay. We insure for stupid. Nobody got hurt." The family gets a much nicer house out of the deal. This happened this past fall, but a family had a fairy house that was outside, right next to their Woodside's house. The fairy house was made out of an old tree and had a bunch of decorations in it, including incense candles. One evening, they decided that they would light the candles for the fairies, which then caught the tree on fire, which then extended into the house. Since it started on the outside, it ran up the side of the house and got into the attic and the second floor. The family was home, but on the first floor while this was happening. It wasn't until someone driving on the road saw the smoke and went to alert the family. Luckily, we were able to save the structure. There was a bit of damage to the roof, attic, and second floor, but the homeowners are rebuilding those areas. Fairies were displeased, I guess. I'm a firefighter, but this wasn't in my district. A guy was attempting to forge a sword in a burn barrel in an alley, based on something he watched on the History Channel. The embers from the forge lit up the building he lived in and destroyed 3 multi-family residential buildings. In college, a girl in the dorms was making popcorn which caught fire in the microwave. She didn't want to get into trouble for it, so she grabbed the flaming bag of popcorn and threw it into the nearby trash can, then proceeded to cover the fire with paper towels to smother it. She actually thought it would work. It did not work. I came back exhausted after work to find the dorm building surrounded by fire trucks. College students are really something else. My school is a nursing and engineering school, full of the people that will be staffing hospitals and designing the technology of tomorrow. I cannot tell you how many times I was awoken in the middle of the night because one of these beacons of the future got stoned and put a burrito in the microwave with the foil still on. Forgetting to close the bottom of your grill, then going overboard with the lighter fluid. A friend of mine in the 5th grade caught himself on fire with lighter fluid when the charcoal wasn't really starting. They used to sell extension arms you could hook to the lighter fluid can, and he used one of those, but the fire ran up the dripping fluid into the can. No problem, he just walked over and set it down and released the holder, at which point the can tipped over. It was only about a quarter full, so little spilled out, but he went to tip it back up when it exploded right when his head was above it and the burning lighter fluid covered his head. He was pretty smart for an 11-year-old. He remembered where the fire extinguisher was, ran over, pulled the pin, and sprayed himself, but he still had burns all over his face and head. Based on the stories from relatives, the answer is by allowing 10 years worth of dryer lint to accumulate inside the machine until it just bursts into flames. It was not an isolated case. Do you mean the lint screen that you're supposed to clean out after every use? I'm surprised that it took 10 years for there to even be a problem. Lint screen does not get it all. I clean mine after every load. One day last year my brother was over for a bit and his wife noted that the dryer was drying slowly, so we decided to check it out and replace the belt while we were at it. The tube carrying the air to the outside had rusted through. Lint was piled up inside the drum, and we have scorch marks at the element. The dryer is about 18 years old. My father was a Boston firefighter for 30 years. One of his more memorable stories was a foreign family who ripped up their cast iron bathtub and built an open flame underneath the tub. They used the tub as a giant oil fryer. Naturally, this didn't work out very well and the house caught fire. To add to the insanity even more, the family absolutely refused to let my dad and his co-workers in without taking their boots off, which of course they couldn't agree to. Just crazy. Not a firefighter, but the apartment building I lived in at the time caught fire because all my neighbors smoke and throw their cigarette butts into the ground, which happened to be fresh mulch before going up the steps. The mulch caught fire, which lit the siding on fire. No one's fire alarms went off. Someone driving by saw the smoke, stopped, ran and pulled the fire alarm, but it was only connected to the buzzer in the breezeway, not to the fire alarms in the apartments. All bedrooms are in the back of the apartments, so no one heard it or woke up. He ran past the flames and banged on everyone's doors to wake people up. The fire department came and put out the fire pretty quickly. I also caught the whole thing on my truck's dash cam, but can't find the video now. It was just one more thing that got us to leave apartments for good. Too many stupid people. I was a chef before I was in a volunteer fire department for a bit, and this was at a restaurant down the street from my old one. Cooks at this restaurant forgot to plug the drain in the deep fryer, so what happened was they put oil in a fryer which drained immediately right before lunch. Turned on the empty fryer, and that's when the coils caught fire. Not only did they spill 5 gallons of oil, burn a fryer, fill a restaurant with smoke, and kill the service day, this was the second time it happened. A family decided to make major renovations on their home with no background in construction and carpentry. They also didn't bring a professional to ensure that their renovations were up to fire code. Lo and behold, an exposed wire sparked a fire in the middle of the night and burned down their entire home. They have 3 kids and are very fortunate they all were able to escape the fire without any injuries. To make matters even worse, they had no house insurance, so they ended up having to rely on a GoFundMe fundraiser to recover financially. Last I heard, they were still living in a hotel trying to figure out their plan of action. This story alone reaffirms my belief that some things are better left to the professionals. Even if you're trying to cut costs, it might be best to pay a little extra to have someone with experience do something for you instead. This avoids terrible situations like this. Not a firefighter, and it wasn't in a house, but on a certain mall here in Monterrey, Mexico. We have a plaza on the 2nd floor. Someone was smoking while playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Since he didn't want to throw his ashes on the floor and the trash can was too far away from him, he decided to make a paper ashtray. Yeah, that didn't work out well, especially when 3 of his friends decided to use it too. Not a firefighter, but happened in my building. In India, generally, you have a small praying place in your house, like a little version of a temple. You lit a diya lamp every day and pray there. In this particular case, the family decided to keep this thing on a freaking refrigerator. The diya fell behind the fridge due to wind from the window adjacent to it. The condenser caught fire and literally exploded. The whole floor was on fire. Luckily, no one was home. It was a really dumb decision to keep a temple on a freaking fridge. Not a firefighter, but I set my parents' bathroom on fire while getting up from the toilet. My mom used to leave potpourri simmering in a small bowl on the back of the toilet with a candle to heat it just below. As I was getting up, I somehow knocked the apparatus off the back of the commode. We had carpet floors in that bathroom, and that section of the floor caught pretty quickly. The fire then found a seam in the wallpaper and ignited the glue fairly easily as well. As the flames rose, it caught the roll of toilet paper on the way up the wall, which really accelerated things. All this took less than 30 seconds, and I remember being somewhat mesmerized at the path the flames traveled. I also remember that I had flushed the toilet before realizing what had happened. I somehow thought to grab the toilet bowl brush, shove it into the commode to get it wet, and then beat out the flames. The aftermath was surprisingly minimal. The small section of carpet was destroyed, the wallpaper wiped clean with some hot water and a rag, and thankfully there was only a little permanent smoke damage on the ceiling, which has seemed to fade over time. Was in my local paper, turned out to be my friend's older brother. He tried to smoke out bees in the loft and set fire to the insulation and burnt the whole house down. My uncle is a firefighter. The answer is Christmas trees. They dry out. They become a ticking time bomb. He used to do an annual demonstration where he'd let a Christmas tree dry out for a few months, then take it outside and ignite it. The flames would shoot 40 feet in the air and the tree would be gone in a few seconds. It was mightily impressive to behold, and now I'm sticking with artificial trees. For years, we would collect everyone's discarded Christmas trees and build a bonfire with them on the shore of Lake Ontario for New Year's Eve. We'd stand on the 10 to 15 foot cliff above it, and the flames would be well above our heads, and so hot that we'd be shucking jackets and such. When the fire dropped, we'd sacrifice more trees down to the fire. It'd be fun to go down the next morning and see how far out the ice had melted from the shoreline. Firefighter here. One extremely cold night, the temperature was -11 wind chills. This guy tries starting a fire in his fireplace and couldn't get it started. He decides to use gasoline, dumps half a gallon on the firewood stacked by the door and the other half onto the wood in the fireplace. As he attempted to light the fire, he couldn't get the lighter to work. Now the vapors are really starting to build. He then goes to the kitchen, which adjoins the room with the fireplace, to use the stove to light some newspaper. As soon as he turned the knob on the stove, the igniter lit the gasoline vapors. The living room was instantly on fire. The vapors singed all his hair and got first-degree burns on his hands and face. We, on the other hand, spent the next few hours in the extreme cold. Flash ahead 3 hours, the firewood outside has somehow ignited and we have to go back. The second fire had some time to really grow. Middle of the night, everyone in bed, no one around. Longest, coldest night of my life. All because some fool decided to use gasoline to start a fire indoors. They had 2 candles, and yeah, one thing led to another, and they burned down their home gym. Why would you have candles burning in your home gym? To cover up the sweat stench. Not a firefighter, but the apartment building I stayed in had a pretty good fire. Guy threw a cigarette in a coffee can full of butts. It was on the far end of the building from us, so my upstairs neighbor and I got to stay. Everyone else had to move. We were dealing with water leaks for almost a year after that. It took them that long to sort out insurance stuff and make repairs. Finally put on a new roof a few weeks before we moved. I hate people that do this. I work in a grocery store, and every couple of weeks in the summer, I have to play amateur firefighter because some idiot thought that throwing a lit cigarette into our outdoor ashtray was a good idea. My partner's a firefighter. He said the dumbest one was where a man tried to barbecue in his basement. His reasoning? I don't want to go outside and risk exposure to coronavirus. It would be safer to do it here in the basement. A news article I read, one guy had a fishbowl in his garden shed. Sunlight focused through the fishbowl through his kitchen window. My father lived in a rented apartment. The landlord lived in the apartment beneath him. My father had switched the fuse of the oven off because he had done some electrical work. He also put some receipts on the oven. In the meantime, the landlord saw he flipped off the fuse and flipped it on. We wondered why it smelled burned, and we discovered that the oven was on and had burned the paper to ash. Amazingly, it did not really burn. The paper just turned to ash. You could even still read some of the words, but if you touched it, it just turned to dust. Once my neighbor stole 15 propane tanks and decided to make a DIY blowtorch. By neighbor, I mean he lived below us. We were giving him our basement. He almost lit the house on fire, but then he tripped on something and fell over. The next morning we looked and saw it had burned a little bit but not too much. He was also very drunk that day. Not a firefighter, but I was living in a big old single-family home that had been converted into 6 apartments. Because it was a house, it had a shingle roof. The owner hired one of those unlicensed, uninsured type outfits to work on the roof. The kind you find hanging out at Home Depot in the morning looking for jobs. Anyways, long story short, the guy was on the roof, smoking, and somehow caught it on fire. Rather than dialing 911, he ran down 3 flights of fire escape, got the garden hose, and ran it back up. Once he got to the top, he realized he never turned it on, so he ran back down, turned it on, and ran back up. Apparently by that time, it was out of control, so he headed off. One of the neighbors finally called 911, but by then, it was a full-on blaze. Destroyed the top 2 floors and most of the first floor. The moral of the story is, just call the professionals. We lived in a basement suite, and the people who lived above us were making toast at 2 a.m. and then used a fork to get it out, but the fork hit something so the toaster caught fire, and my mom tried to wake me up, but I just pulled my blanket over my head and said, "I just want to sleep a little more." And then my mom said the house could burn down, and I was the first one out of the house. My neighbors forgot they had ferrets inside. We grabbed our dog, but they didn't grab their ferrets. The fire department came, but my neighbors could have put out the fire if they unplugged the toaster and put baking soda on it. I have been a firefighter for 20 years. The dumbest way I have seen a house fire started was when people squatting in a basement decided a space heater would be handy in drying their clothes. Then they waited 15 minutes before calling us, trying to put it out with a garden hose into the basement on a 5-degree night. They burned down their home and the one next door. Mid-80s, near the beginning of my career, a young lady finished putting flea spray on her dog when she noticed a tick embedded in its flank. Ever hear of the tick removal technique in which you blow out a match and touch the hot tip to the tick, thereby causing it to back out of the dog? Yeah, the dog caught fire. Little fellow ran under the bed, which also caught fire. Lady grabbed the pup with spray-wet hands, and they too caught on fire. Long story short, the house was a mess, but both the lady and the dog fortunately survived with moderate burns. There was also the lady who tried to sanitize her panties in the microwave, but I was off that day. A guy had a bunch of ants coming through his wall. He started burning them with butane torch and it ended really badly. He thought it is okay because the exterior wall was concrete. Yeah, some people are that stupid. I'm not entirely sure if an actual fire was involved, but back when my dad was a firefighter, he and his colleagues were dealing with a 3-car pileup down one side of the motorway. People in the lane going the other way were rubbernecking so much that it caused another 3-car pileup on the other side of the motorway. He also told me of a time they were in their truck at a red light and noticed at the petrol station next to them, a guy was filling up his tank with a cigarette hanging out his mouth. When the light went to green, they drove out of that area as quickly as they could. Probably too late for this to get traction, but by far the dumbest is people smoking while on medicinal oxygen, like the tanks are coated in labels about how flammable it is. My dad said that one time there was a small fire because a homeless man tried to use a microwave that he installed himself underneath the pier and it exploded. Apparently it worked the first few times he used it though. Not a firefighter, but a guy in our dorm set the kitchen on fire when he tried to make a grilled cheese by assembling the sandwich, then jamming the whole thing into a toaster and passing out. Lady was mad at her landlord, so she soaked an interior closet full from floor to ceiling of clothes in her second-floor apartment with an accelerant, I think rubbing alcohol. She then lit it on fire and left. Luckily, she shut the door, which kept it at a slow burn and contained it for the most part. Her apartment and everything in it was ruined from water and smoke damage. She was very upset we were throwing her clothes and items from an adjacent bedroom out the second-story balcony to the ground below to overhaul and ensure we weren't called back for a rekindle and burn down apartment complex. Not a firefighter, but there's a case I heard about on the news where someone was trying to burn spiders with hairspray and a lighter and caught the whole house on fire. Another tried to deep fry a frozen turkey inside the house. I don't think you could deep fry a frozen turkey anywhere, could you? Unless you're literally on an open area with nothing flammable within 100 meters, including yourself. That turkey would also burn before cooking through. People terrify me.